All right, go for it.
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and thank you for tuning in to our EIW keynote speaker talk, Converting at Cambridge, a Story. Alhamdulillah, as many of you may know, Explore Islam Week is off to a fantastic start. We've already had our Islam Through Time exhibition at St. John's College. We've had a fantastic interfaith lunch at the Eco Mosque on Sunday. Capture Your Favourites has been running through the week, and today I'm so pleased to introduce Lucy Bushell-Matthews, who will be sharing her journey with us. So Lucy is currently Director of Operations at the National Zakah Foundation. She studied economics at Newnham between 1990 and 1993, after which she wrote her book, Welcome to Islam, A Convert's Tale, and we're very lucky to hear some of that tale firsthand today. As always, please submit any questions using the Menti code in the chat, though I have quite a few prepared questions myself to put to you, Lucy, to prompt a conversation about conversion, if you will. So without further ado, I'll let you share your screen and get started, In Sha Allah.
Great. Well, assalamu alaikum. Thank you, Iman. So today I'm going to tell a story. I'll start with a really quick version for those who are thinking, I really don't have much time, I can't listen for long. The quick version is I became Muslim in my second year at Newnham College, Cambridge, about 30 years ago, and I'm still Muslim now. Happy ever after, and all that. But before I go into the slightly longer version you may be rightly expecting, I'd like to ask you something. What makes you like to hear stories of converts? Why have you tuned in this evening? I wonder if you'd be happy to put a few answers in the chat. Why are you here and why have you tuned in? If anybody could let me know so I can see what's motivating you tonight. Curiosity. To learn about different perspectives. Thank you. I found that really helpful too. Great. Have someone interested in Islam? A reminder of why we're Muslim ourselves. Excellent. Inspiration. No pressure. It's very interesting when people say revert stories always inspire people, and it's great, and inshallah it will help. But it is interesting to me at the same time that sometimes we get a sense of validation of our own faith when that validation can also come from ourselves. Like we don't need to have that validation from other people, but perhaps it's helpful for us to hear it from others as well. Okay, thank you. So many of us love to hear stories of converts. It's partly for the validation. There are some people, no one put it here, but I found in my experience, some people actually love to hear how different families react to the news, whether families have accepted it, or unfortunately, more typically, whether there's been pain there. And as I think has been alluded to just now, it reminds those of us who were born into Muslim families to really be appreciative of what we're born into. But today, I don't want to just want you just to think of this as a story. I would really encourage you to think what you can take from this. Like if I wasn't born, or if you weren't born into a Muslim family, would you take the leap to be Muslim now? And while I'm going to relate things of around 30 years ago, maybe things have changed since then. And if you are Muslim already, how could you and all the CUISoc that's here today best support a new convert to Islam today? And I'd also encourage you to think, are there any learnings that you can apply to your own life? And my experience at uni was that I was in fact embracing the faith around the same time as many of my Muslim student friends who had really taken it for granted until they were at uni, away from home for the first time. And they really had to think for themselves about who and what they wanted to be, and whether the Muslim faith was one that they genuinely wanted for themselves. So while the decision to take the Shahada was the same for me as for my Muslim friends, the context and consequences for me were rather different. So there's a few angles to my own experience: the personal, the social, and the theological. And where does the story begin? Well, for me, it starts with the personal. It begins in childhood. I had a father who taught me to relentlessly question, to not assume anything. For example, He asked me, how would I explain to someone from first principles how to boil an egg? Now, that might seem a really random, weird question to you, but if you break that down into all the multiple steps, like it's actually quite a difficult thing to do. Why is it okay to wear a bikini outside, he would ask me, but not underwear? Is it loving to give a cigarette lover a gift of cigarettes when that very gift can kill? He was asking me all these questions to get me to think. And both my parents brought me up with a traditional Christian upbringing. I went to church often, whenever my parents or indeed my school made me. Both at school and at church, I learned so many stories about people in the Bible, Jonah, Noah, and so on. I didn't know them as prophets though. And if ever I had a form to complete which asked a question about religion, there in those days was an option to put Church of England, and I always put that. It certainly sounded like it was the right kind of religion for an English person. And like those around me at the time, I had a very monocultural social circle. Everyone, and I mean everyone, I mixed with was English and white, apart from when we lived in Portugal for a year when I was 9, and I became inseparable from my new best friend Asha, whose parents came from India. That's a little bit about my personal background, but the social connections with others were a really important part of my journey to Islam. And I met many people along the way who were a crucial part of that journey. The first Muslim I met was when I started sixth form, age 16. Once we got talking, I was shocked to discover we had such different conceptions of Jesus, peace be upon him. When I was 17, I bought my first book that mentioned Islam and had verses from the Quran in it. It was quite a controversial choice at the time. The book was Salman Rushdie's Satanic Verses, and the bookshop insisted on wrapping it up in an unmarked paper bag so no one would see. And then when I was 18, I had a year off. I started working in London, and at one point was working near Regent's Park Mosque. So I passed by, dropped in to see what I would find. A Muslim man was also visiting at the time, and he very kindly spent half an hour explaining a few basics, and he bought me a book from the bookshop. I acknowledge I could have had a completely different encounter. I know people who unfortunately have, but that particular encounter with that complete stranger was exactly what I needed. And I am so appreciative of his generosity of his time. I went on to work on a communal Jewish kibbutz in Israel. It was by the Sea of Galilee. Quite a few 18-year-olds from the UK did that in those days. It was considered quite normal. Now, it was the Holy Land. So I took part in the Jewish festival of Purim, and I visited famous churches and mosques. I tried to look inside the church of Capernaum, which is where Jesus preached and performed miracles. But I wasn't actually allowed in because I wasn't modestly dressed enough. However, when I got to the mosques, I was genuinely surprised to feel such a sense of peace in those open spaces. During that period, I met some amazing examples of Muslims. There was a Palestinian Muslim family in Jericho who had so little, yet killed one of what seemed to be their last chickens so that they could feed me and my friend who unexpectedly passed by their house. I went on to travel in Egypt, and there were some not so good examples for me, like men who viewed an 18-year-old female in shorts from the UK as just right for harassing. So by the time I came to Cambridge, after such quite a diverse series of encounters, I was ready to question and understand my own Christian faith more and understand the faith of those I had met. I actually wanted to understand the faith of those I had met in order to dismiss that faith, not in order to be actually fully open-minded, but still I wanted to understand it. I was excited, though, to be part of a free-thinking and open-minded space where I would have time to develop my own perspectives on politics, on religion, and everything else. And at Freshers' Fair, I signed up to the student societies for all 3 major political parties. I also decided to join the Christian and Islamic societies. It was easy to become a member of the Cambridge Christian Union, CUISoc. I then looked for the Cambridge Muslim Union, or whatever the right kind of union would be, but that turned out to be a bit more complicated. I came across a Muslim student at Freshers' Fair who urged me not to join the Islamic Student Society. I must make sure I join the Student Islamic Society. So I eventually found both Muslim societies, and then I couldn't remember which one I was meant to join and which one I wasn't. For those of you who are familiar with the Monty Python film, Life of Brian, Brian tries to join the Judean People's Front, and then he's not sure should he join the People's Front of Judea. Felt very similar to me. So I found the CUISoc squash, of whichever one I did join, pretty isolating. It was all Muslim. It was almost all male. This was 30 years ago. And those men who I shared short conversations with seemed to find the situation pretty awkward. I subsequently discovered a handful of Muslims at my college, Newnham, but they were either medics or lawyers, and they were incredibly busy. Later, I joined the Pakistani Society. I discovered it seemed to be a lot easier to meet Muslims there, and the food at that time was much better too. During my first year, I attended the occasional CUISoc lecture. I'd go there, turn up at the advertised time, and often no one else was even in the lecture theatre for the first 20 or 30 minutes. There seemed to be this other concept of Muslim time. Now, how things have changed over 30 years, and it's great to see that here you are, after just a few minutes, all there in the waiting room before the talking began. Now, while I was in the exploring the different CUISoc lectures, I attended some Christian Union lectures as well. I did find the Trinitarian evangelical messages coming from those lectures pretty confusing. And so the lectures weren't going so well. So I read and read and read some more. And the reading of the books I found really opened my eyes. Now, given I'm presuming the audience is predominantly Muslim, I won't be going into too much detail about the theological reasons behind me becoming Muslim. After all, we're all Muslim. Those of us who are Muslim, why any single one of us who's Muslim chosen to be or remain Muslim? No one is making us remain Muslim. Each one of us should be being Muslim out of our own free will. Every day when we pray, it's a conscious choice and it's out of our own free will. I will simply say that I gradually came to believe in the existence and the oneness of God for all time and all space. Just one God. And the many prophets, all the people I heard about in my childhood, giving the same message over time and to different communities. Believe in that one God and live a good life. Follow the way of Abraham, peace be upon him. It did take me a while to get my head around the possibility of a final prophet, Muhammad. I'd never heard of him. I didn't know anything about him. And yet I found he was confirming the way of Abraham, peace be upon them both. I was discovering at Cambridge there were so many things I didn't know anything about. The more I knew about any subject, the more I realized I didn't know. And so I found this was just yet another. So it was in my second year, during the first term, there came a night in my room in Old Hall at Newnham when I was unable to sleep. You can see it's actually quite emotional for me, even though it's 30 years later. I lay awake with thoughts circulating endlessly in my head. God would know I believed in him and in all the prophets. Yet I wanted to believe in God and carry on with my life normally. So much easier. I now saw that God would know that. I realized that God was so all-powerful. He must be everywhere. And that meant God was with me, right there and right then. So God could see me. God could see my innermost thoughts. God would know that I believed in him. Yet I never prayed to him. I never thanked him. I never even acknowledged him. What kind of belief was that? My belief should be backed up by actions. But I didn't want to change. My life was really comfortable. I had a good relationship with my parents. I was happy with my friends. I was at this great university. God would know all of this. I tossed and I turned. I wanted to sleep. I wanted to make the problem go away. I couldn't. The hours passed by. The new day dawned. And I was really exhausted. I finally accepted that if I wanted to be true to my convictions, I would have to let my belief in God affect my life. And if I didn't, I was only deceiving myself. And in fact, since then, over and over in the Quran, it says about how we are the losers if we don't take certain actions. We are the ones who lose. Doesn't affect anyone else. So very reluctantly, I submitted to God in will, in heart, and in mind. And I remembered the Arabic word for a person who submits is a Muslim with a little m, and I was becoming one of those. I didn't believe I had much of a choice anymore. Now, a key question I've since thought about is, why me? Why was I going through this? And why, as far as I knew, was I the only person in my college going through this? And I wasn't aware of even other people in the university going through that journey at the same time. My reflection is that there are many, many paths to Islam. And my personal one was through a more reasoning, curious path, reflecting on the people I've met, the lectures I heard, the books I read, building on the childhood I had. But I know others who are logical, like me, but don't see the logic in this. I know others who reason, like me, but don't see the signs in the verses or in nature or in mankind as clear and compelling. I know other people who come to Islam through a much more emotional path. Perhaps they found someone special in their lives who's Muslim. Others turned to Islam through compassion. A close friend found Islam through her experiences of caring for those who were dying. Yet as God must have made the path accessible to all, there must be something those who take that path have in common. Now, I've recently read a book on the names of God by Al-Ghazali, which has helped me reach a conclusion. There are two common features, and I'll just share the screen for a moment. The first one is a sense of perception. Are we looking at people and events? Have we chosen to think about bigger picture ideas? Or have we chosen to think about ultimately the biggest picture, about the purpose of life? I'm afraid you can't see the screen. Sorry, the screen sharing isn't work. Just one moment. Thank you for pointing that out. Is that better? Great, thank you. So the first image I was referring to is the one on the left, the birds flying high, about having a really broad sense of perception, looking at people and then taking a higher sense of perception, looking at events, or really thinking about big picture ideas and ultimately the biggest picture, the purpose of life. But coming to the second picture, the other is, how do we approach our feelings? Do we feel the fear and make the leap to what we think is the right path for us, despite the fear? Or are we letting our beliefs and actions be more determined by other feelings, unrestrained feelings, feelings of love? These might be love for things like clothing, food, alcohol, love for people, such important people in our lives like parents, love for our friends, love for a potential spouse, or love indeed for ideas. Developing self-restraint of those feelings isn't just for Ramadan. So in this case, I'm referring to feeling the fear and letting the fear overwhelm or basically overcoming our fear and trying to do what is right, or what we think and we know is right, overwhelming all those feelings of love that we might have for all the other things of our life. And every single one of us has the capacity to strive to improve in both of those areas, constantly raising our sense of perception and constantly looking at the balance between fear and love. I'm just going to stop sharing there for a moment. So back to Cambridge. There was a Pakistani society dinner a week after what I considered to be my personal and private conversion. A Newnham lawyer asked me, when am I going to do this conversion more formally? She directly asked me, what are you waiting for? And I didn't have an answer. So straight after the dinner, a group of us, impromptu, gathered in my student room. I said the Shahada in English and very haltingly and rather embarrassingly for me in Arabic. And then after that, once a week, I cycled to see a very special medic friend. Her name was Sabiha at St. John's. We talked on the Bridge of Sighs. She helped me with the practicalities of prayer, and she helped me deepen my understanding. To her, I am and will be forever indebted. Now, at the time, the head of the CUISoc happened to be a Muslim convert called Kevin. He was the only other convert I was aware of at the uni. He'd taken on the name of Khalid. I managed to chat with him one-to-one just once at that time after the Friday CUISoc congregational prayer, which while I was at uni was in a room at Clare College. I often went to Jummah there, but to be honest, I didn't find it a great experience. There were usually at most 3 of us women, and the men and women were separated by a row of tables, which the men very kindly put on their sides. And of course, the table legs were always pointed towards the women. Anyway, after Khalid had led the prayers, I followed him at a discreet distance to his student room and arrived in his room several minutes after him, as planned. And Khalid explained to me what had led him to Islam, how his family had reacted, and what life had been like for him since. Khalid ensured he kept the door open throughout the conversation. I don't recall we actually spoke again during our time at uni. I think at the time he found the situation rather awkward, given his position within the CUISoc. Now, in my 3rd year, I prepared for work, for graduation, and for marriage. So firstly, the work. I joined the various graduate recruitment rounds, often for roles in finance. I was studying economics. It seemed to be a natural path, even though that wasn't where I wanted to end up. So I applied for one role in a confectionery company. And the application form asked, what was the most difficult thing you've had to do so far? And I believe in honesty. So I answered with a couple of paragraphs on my decision to become Muslim. And my application, I soon heard back, wasn't taken any further. And then I took up the recruiter's offer of feedback. I got on what was then a payphone, and the recruiter explained to me that my answer to that question was just too personal, and compared me with another student who had apparently told in her application form that she had decided to have an abortion. And that student also didn't get any further. In contrast, when I got to interview stage for a finance role with a fast-moving consumer goods company, the interviewer asked me, when have I ever done anything out of the ordinary? And I simply said, well, I've become Muslim. He moved the conversation quickly on. I'll never know if that counted for me or against me in the overall assessment, but I do know I was given the role. Also, in my 3rd year, preparations began for graduation. Like many students, or all students, I received a letter which set out how we were all going to have to kneel before the Vice-Chancellor. And that then the Vice-Chancellor will say, by the authority committed to me, I admit you to the degree of, whatever degree we're having and we're reading, in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. That threw me a little. And then the letter included a form. I could tick the box if I was Jewish or if I was Unitarian Christian. And then if I ticked those boxes, I then wouldn't have to kneel or have the same words said. So I promptly went to the administrative office of our college, explained my belief, and very kindly, they let me have a special exemption. Now, I'm under the impression diversity has come a long way since, and I'm pretty sure that form has now changed. So there was work, there was graduation. But in my 3rd year, I began practical wedding preparations. I was marrying that person. You may remember I said I met in 6th form when I was 16. We'd become close much later after it was clear in which direction my faith was going. I'd always imagined getting married in a church, in a white dress. So undeterred by the minor fact of my faith change, I asked for a meeting with the vicar who shared his time between Newnham and Selwyn. And I asked, could we hold the marriage ceremony in the chapel? I find it really hard to change my views, and this is what I'd had for years. And so I was, adapting to this whole Muslim thing a bit slowly. I thought I would helpfully mention that Muslims weren't allowed statues. So for this whole ceremony to work, if you could just take the statues of Jesus out of the church temporarily, or maybe cover them up, that would be really great. For some reason, he immediately, yet very politely, declined the proposal. I'm a little older now. Why did I ever think he would adapt his Christian church to suit the requirements of a Muslim? I was young and I was an optimist, and it certainly wasn't the best idea I'd ever had. The chaplain then said to me, I don't actually know much about Islam. Can you tell me what it's all about? And that caught me by surprise, partly because I was now pretty busy stressing about alternative ceremony venues and wondering about possibilities, and partly because I had assumed that he knew the basics about Islam already as a chaplain. So I quickly told him about the 5 ritual acts of worship. And he commented, oh, so it's just about actions then, and held open the door for me to leave. And I left with a sinking feeling that I'd missed out something really important. And then I realized I had completely neglected to mention the articles of faith, including the core belief in God and the need to acknowledge his authority. I hadn't mentioned Iman. As God says in the Quran, chapter 27, verse 81, when speaking to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, only those who will hear you, who believe in our signs and submit to our will. It is belief and submission which enables that hearing, and it's that hearing which facilitates action. For me, I had come to Islam through the feeling of Iman. For me, belief and submission came before action. How could I have already forgotten my own journey? The good news is I found a new location for our wedding ceremony, Newnham College Gardens. And in all those traditional romantic novels, as we well know, the story ends there. Reader, or rather listener or watcher, I married him. And that, in a nutshell, is the end of my tale of converting at Cambridge. Except there's a little bit more. I'll just share my screen briefly again. So that wedding day was the day, I just checking, can you see the screen? Yeah, that wedding day was the day I thought would be a really great day to chart a new independent life. The day that I would choose to start wearing hijab in front of all my family, all my relatives, and all my parents' friends. And that day was the start of a series of new chapters. I eventually went on to write a book about life after being Muslim a few years later. How was life now different with my family, in the workplace, on Hajj, in the Muslim community, in the mainstream community, raising children as Muslim? All of these experiences that I had never imagined at that time that I was tossing and turning and thinking about taking the Shahada. I very nearly didn't write the book about life as a Muslim at all, because my publisher offered me an intriguing set of book covers. Here's the first one. I don't know if anyone can spot a typo there. If you anyone see? Yep. And then just to give me a bit of diversity, I got sent a second one. Still with typo. But, you know, 2 isn't enough to choose from. I really needed to have a full array for this designer. So here I have it, all 3. Which of those 3 book covers did I want for my book? Now, I wasn't a fan of any of the 3 one-eyed looks. In fact, when I get stressed, I resort to tea and chocolate cake. And I actually saw that. I went to a coffee shop and had the biggest slice of chocolate cake I'd ever seen, because I needed to sort of like decompress for the shock of potentially having one of these as my book cover. And I actually refused to write any more of the book if they insisted I choose one of them. Anyway, I gave them loads of ideas for a more light-hearted cover. And the designers spent clearly a long time thinking then, what are they going to do with my feedback? And they came up with this really innovative take on light-hearted inspiration. And here we have it. So that's my light-hearted book cover. And so it remains. One final epilogue. You may recall I mentioned when I was 17, I bought my first book that mentioned Islam, and it had to be wrapped up, as many Muslims at the time were getting distressed by it. And I understand that. Yet only a couple of years ago, I was made aware of a curious 17-year-old who was interested in Islam, reading my own book, a girl who'd chosen to cover it up so her parents wouldn't see her reading it and get concerned she was becoming Muslim. She had wrapped it up using the cover of Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. by J.K. Rowling. Now, I will know the public mood has completely turned upside down if ever someone wraps up one of her books within mine. I will be very surprised if that ever happens. So having reached this point, I'd love to know if you have any thoughts about the questions that I mentioned at the start. If I wasn't born or you weren't born into a Muslim family, would you take the leap to be Muslim now? And while things have changed since the events I've just related here, how could you and the CUISoc best support a new convert to Islam today? And thirdly, have you found any learnings that you can apply to your own life? So I wonder if you'd like to answer any of those, whether if you weren't born into a Muslim family, would you take the leap to be Muslim now? And while things have changed, how could you and the CUISoc best support a new convert? And are there any learnings you can apply to my own life? I'm just wondering, Iman, did the pictures of the book covers show up or not?
Yes,
They
indeed,
did.
they
Okay,
did.
okay, great. I mean the three one-eyed versions. Yeah. So any thoughts, Iman? I think uni is a period of serious growth, whether coming from a family or not. I certainly experienced that. And I've encouraged people since to really take that on at uni, because after uni, once you get involved in your work and so on, it's really hard to find that, carve out that space. Thank you, Iman. Anyone else want to comment on whether you would be ready to take the leap to be Muslim, or thoughts on how you could best support a new convert to Islam or a convent to Islam, or whether there are any learnings that you can apply? So someone's got their hand up.
Sorry. I really resounded with what you said about the belief and submission came before action. Because I think coming from a non-practicing family, even though Islam was there, it is, like Iman said, when you come to university, like everybody is on a journey of growth and it needs facilitation in different ways. But I really resounded with what you said about that aspect of it.
Oh, great to hear. Thank you. There's someone has his hand up.
Yeah,
Kamil.
Thank you very much for your talk. It was really inspiring. And again, I also responded a lot with the bit that you mentioned when you were, you couldn't speak. Just thinking about how long you, what you knew, and that being something that just forced you to just reconsider everything. I think that's one of the main things that I find keeps me going is that idea that Allah sees you, and he's constantly aware, and at the end of the day you do have a duty. And I mean, your question about whether I'd be Muslim, if I wasn't born into a Muslim family, I mean it is impossible to answer, but I think because of the kind of way that we see our iman going oscillating between high and low, I think if I was in a higher feeling, I maybe would say, yeah, I would become Muslim. But I think because, I mean, even being Muslim versus being non-Muslim, you still know about the kind of things that you feel the desire to do, and the kind of vices that you might have, and whether you would have the strength to give those up if you ever became fully engrossed in them, and if you had the opportunity to become just really lost in that, whether you'd be able to get out, and ultimately it's just an opportunity to be grateful for our opportunity and just be inspired by your story, and where you came from. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for sharing such an honest response. There is that bit I mentioned about the sort of the fear versus love. It really is a sort of how much do you want to stay attached to all of those other things, versus actually you have to let go, and some of the things you let go turn out to be, well, all of the things, by definition, everything you let go of is not as important as this. Thank you.
I could just remind people now that there should be a Menti code in the chat. So if you have any questions, please do feel free to either unmute yourself at the end or add to them. But I do have a list of questions, if that's all right, Lucy. So the first one is, you've spoken a lot about the struggles of finding a community, even when there's an existing one in ISOC, and you do see some Muslims around you, there was still a sense of alienation. Mm-hmm. So my question is, did you find that community, and if so, where?
Interesting. Well, it may sound I didn't find it. No, I didn't find it. I went to London immediately. I found London quite an isolating place. Massive, people were dotted around all over the place. I would sit at Regent's Park Mosque often, and alhamdulillah, I found someone who became a good friend, and that really helped through the and then I found the Islamic Society of Britain. That really helped me as well. So I found a national community first, but that's quite hard to be connected to a national community in your day-to-day life, and when working, it's hard to sort of to have that time too. So while it gave me some strength to slowly build up the more national connections through that, I did find a convert support through what was known at that time as the New Muslim Foundation. So that really helped me. But then what changed was when I had children. And so then I really wanted the children to be part of a community. And so I just knew one other person in the town that I was living in, and basically slowly we built up a community, and other people came, and one person became two, and two became four, and so on. And that whole experience of sort of collectively building up a community was something that was so valuable for me, and I felt so much part of it. And I had sort of different communities, I suppose, where I found a few converts, and we had a little mini community there, and I found a few local people in a mini community there. And so then now we have a big sort of inclusive community where we don't know almost who's became Muslim umpteen years ago and who didn't. It's very it's a diverse, and we all just have shared values, I suppose. So now I have found the community both in the UK and when I lived abroad. I made also the same effort to sort of to find, join, and build a community.
Actually, on the topic of community, I thought I'd mention that Newnham is now home to a tight community of just over 30 Muslims.
It's amazing,
alhamdulillah.
It's amazing.
And the relatively new Newnham Akhawat Society solely exists to represent Muslim women within the college. So I suppose out of a kind of a selfish curiosity, I was going to ask how many were around in your time. So I know you mentioned some doctors and lawyers, but I was wondering, so how many were around, and where did you find the majority of your friends?
So I think there were probably in Newnham maybe 3 or 4 in total that I was aware of, and I think they were not really. It was something unusual, and so they weren't aware of things to begin with. Things like that, you know, someone new to Islam wouldn't even maybe know it was Eid, or when I knew it was Eid, it wouldn't occur to me that people would go home to their families for Eid. So the very first Eid, I knocked on all of the Muslim women who I knew were at Newnham, and all of their doors were shut. It was really confusing for me, and they'd all gone home. So where did I find? I found sort of assorted Muslims through Jummah. Basically, there weren't many at all. Yeah, so Cambridge for me was my husband was at Oxford, and Oxford had a different sort of vibe going on at that time. So I suppose oddly I found more of a Muslim circle elsewhere.
So we all saw that beautiful picture of you in your headscarf on the day of your wedding reception. So I was wondering how that visible marker of your Muslimness kind of affected the way that people received you in terms of daily interactions, and both from Muslims and non-Muslims.
Yeah, I mean, it's just the most visible marker that you can have, really, and well, I find it so, and yet, and oddly, I also find it quite a straightforward thing to do. But in terms of how people perceive me, so that job that I took on in my third year, the one that I got offered for, because I was offered it, and then I had the wedding day, which was the day I started wearing hijab. So I walked in there on my first day wearing it, and my boss was a bit surprised because they actually, at reception, they didn't know who I was. They thought I was in the wrong place, and they had no idea who this person was, because they thought they'd recruited someone else. And I just walked into my boss's office on the first day, because I feel it's really important to, on the first day somewhere, to sort of set out your stall and set out who you are. And so I said to my new boss on the first day of my first job, I'm going to need a place to pray. And this guy was a Scottish beer drinker, and he was just really thrown by the whole thing. And he just said, go speak to HR. I have no idea. And that was fine. I did speak to HR, and I got the sick room. And actually, since then, the sick room has become although it's an unfortunate title of the room, they may have renamed it now to something else, but that became a place for prayer. Another role I took subsequently, I think me wearing the hijab was almost part of. It was helpful because it showed my recruiter, who perhaps wouldn't ask these questions now, but was asking questions about it, and I think I really got the impression that he valued the fact that I wouldn't be afraid to think differently, and that sort of independent thought was something that they valued in the role that I was applying for. So this is in a work context. Socially, it's I mean, I've had all kinds of experiences. I find I know, because I was sort of brought up within a deeply English culture, I find that there's a huge amount that people aren't saying. And so I pick up on very, very sort of subtle cues. This isn't about sort of people hurling abuse or anything like that. What is concerning to me is when you can just sense people aren't fully, perhaps don't fully trust you. And that's what concerns me, that if I didn't have this small piece of cloth on my head, I would be trusted, but with it, I'm not. And I'm not always, but I'm just aware that sometimes, and I find that really strange, because I could take this off like now in an hour's time, whatever, and I would be exactly the same with exactly the same ideas. And yet for some reason, my neighbor might trust me then, but not now. And so I find that a bit, maybe not surprising, but perhaps disappointing. But overall, I've been very fortunate. I've got a sort of a lovely social circle of people who are Muslim and not Muslim, and all sorts. But it's been a while. It was a big deal for my parents that time, 10 years ago. But life has moved on.
While we're on the subject of careers, there is a question pertaining to that, and then afterwards, I think Muhammad has his hand raised, so we'll come to you in a second. But you've kind of spoken about how Islam is something which is not compartmentalized to just one aspect of belief. So it involves actions, it involves interactions with other people, it involves giving up things. So how did faith affect those decisions after Cambridge, specifically in terms of choosing a career path? I think that's something that a lot of people are thinking about at the moment.
I think it probably just gave me a much more, it just highlighted things for me that perhaps I thought anyway. How for me, Islam just sort of, I suppose you could say, enhanced the way out. Well, like I didn't change character or thought so much, but to be a bit more specific, I had it really made me appreciate the value of my time. And there's an organization you may have come across called 80,000 hours, and 80,000 hours is saying you've got 80,000 hours in your career. Make sure that those 80,000 hours are as high value and high impact as they can. I don't mean high value in terms of salary, I mean high impact for the world. And so as Muslims, our high impact for the world is just, goes beyond a sort of more I suppose, secular framework, but we would ideally encourage us to think, what is that impact we can make? How can we use our skills that we have been given to make the greatest impact? And so that's part of it. And the other part of it is every single one of you here at Cambridge, you know, you have been blessed. You've been, obviously everyone is blessed with everything that they have and that they've been given. All of us are, but I'm aware that this is a Cambridge University Society talk, and it's such a privilege for those of you who are at the university. And so with privilege comes responsibility, and the more privilege you have, the more responsibility. And so I feel that framework is really clear within Islam, that we're going to be held to account for everything that we've been given. And so therefore that is what affects my career choice, to try to make sure that I can kind of stand up on the Day of Judgment and at least say, I tried to make the most impact with the skills that I've been given. Is that specific enough, Iman? I'm sorry, I can't remember the beginning of the question, but is that specific enough?
Yeah. Hi, assalamu alaikum. Thanks for your talk. It's nice that you touched on responsibility, actually, because it kind of ties into what I wanted to ask, which is, so as Muslims, and yeah, mainly as Muslims, what's the best thing we can do to accommodate and make space for both people interested in Islam but not quite ready to take the jump and say the Shahada yet, and also those reverts who have made the Shahada? Like, what's the best thing we can do to be as open and helpful as possible, in your opinion?
Yeah, so I think for me it would probably be asking how they would like to be supported, and preempting things where you can. So to break it down a little bit, that example I gave about Eid, if this is somebody who is a Muslim and you know they're Muslim and you're thinking, oh, I'm off to see my family, you'd think in advance, oh, they're not likely to have a family, would you like to join me? That's a really practical thing. Or I'm off here, I'm off there. You may know where the best place to go to Jummah. You may know where to get your meat from, or all these practical things. You know, can I help you? Can I show you? What would you like to know? And just leave the ball in their court. And let's say for people who are interested in Islam, just not to pressure them in any way, because you don't know what journey they're taking. You don't know what is happening outside in their own home life. So I would just encourage you to be as gentle as possible with them, both before and immediately afterwards as well, and allow for the journey to be gradual, journey of exploration to be gradual, and allow for questions, and just to sort of be there as an open listening ear, but to invite them to things and talks and books and things that are of interest, but just to leave it in their court and be their friend.
Thanks. And also following up on that, so apologies if you answered this at the start, because I missed a little bit at the beginning, so there's a chance you might have talked over this. But so, for example, I've come across multiple people I know who like are interested in Islam, but then at the same time they feel like almost they're not good enough for it, in a sense, as if they're doing things that they know are wrong, both in the framework of Islam and just their morals, but they don't quite feel like they're good enough to become Muslims, and I've struggled like sort of disabusing people of that notion. So is that something that you know anyone that's experienced or you've dealt with before?
I'm afraid I haven't dealt with it, but I suppose I referred to it in the sense of the Iman comes before, for me, Iman before Islam. So the most, or I would encourage you, if you find people who are feeling that. I have heard people say, oh, you know, so and so could never become Muslim. He needs his food too much, or actually friends at uni would say to me, oh, I can never become Muslim. I couldn't give up, whatever. But actually, the first thing is Iman, right? If you have. If you actually believe, and you believe there is Allah there, God there, and God is all knowing, and like, actually, that's step one. And then you always do step one first, and then step 2 after, and step 3 later. And if you stop at step 7, well, life's a journey, and you know, maybe you'll never get to step 8. But I would just remind them that if there's somebody who is in that right state of mind, that, you know, the Prophet, peace be upon him, revealed the Quran was revealed to him gradually. The Prophet, peace be upon him, explained the message so gradually. We're encouraged to do things gradually. And so, and the other thing I would say is, there's no perfect Muslim. Not one of us, no perfect person. Not one of us are perfect. What we are encouraged to do continually is striving. And that's all we can do. Just do our best.
All right, thank you.
You're mute, Taman.
So no, thank you for that really wonderful response. I would also just like to mention on a more structural level that organisations within Cambridge, if this is anything that would be of use to anybody, would be something like, fluffed that. What I'm trying to say is Cambridge Crescent is a really fantastic organisation that dedicated to converts and those interested in Islam in Cambridge. So if that would be of use to you or anybody you know, please do get in touch. I think the link should be shared on the chat later. But it was set up around the same time as Cambridge Muslim College by Sheikh Abdul Hakim Murad and his wife Nabila Winters. So please do look into that, because I think it's a very practical way to support converts on an organisational level as well as just interpersonal relationships. Actually, this links on very nicely onto the next question I have, which is that the Chamber of Secrets dust jacket that you suggested was actually my idea. And I found it funny that such a seemingly innocuous book could, you know, be found in the restricted section, so to speak. So I think the fact is that Islam and taking an interest in it is so often constructed as a taboo topic or something that we kind of catastrophize about. Oh, radical, slightly dangerous. So how do you think that converts or those interested in Islam should be engaging with these sources of information, or are there any sources of information that we should be avoiding or cautious of?
You've linked it to the Chamber of Secrets, but I presume that's not the source of information you are referring to. I mean, there's just, it's a dilemma for all of us, right? Globally, that we have so much information available now that it's hard to know, and therefore ideally you would find people who trust, people of knowledge who can refer you to good books. People, it sounds like now there's this great organization that's set up in Cambridge, and so they would be a place I would be turning to first to understand what are the good books to read and so on. I've had when I became Muslim, I had some people in my ear saying all sorts of things. Oh, I need to learn like Khudafis. That was really important for me to learn that word. I need to do this, I need to do that. And so they would, you know, everyone's got their little pet things. And so I suppose it's about surrounding yourselves with people you've built up trust in their trust in their intentions, trust in their knowledge, and to go through them, because at the beginning you could be just exposed to all sorts of things.
Just a couple more questions from me, and then inshallah we'll wrap up soon unless anybody else would like to unmute themselves. What strikes me is that converts are in this quite a tricky position in which you're, on one hand, you're a minority within a minority. On the other hand, I think particularly for men without many visible markers of their Muslim identities, there's also the sense of white privilege, and we do see English Muslims at the forefront of a lot of things, perhaps early. I think a lot of us have come across on social media. Converts are very readily given platforms at very early stages as well, just because although people do find convert stories very inspiring, there's also a kind of pressure that's placed on them. So really, I would say how have you dealt with that kind of contradictory, on one hand being celebrated and on the other hand perhaps a sense of alienation?
So there are a number of people, I found oddly over the years, have said, oh, you know, mashallah, a convert to Islam, you converts, you're so much better than we are. And each time I'm like, no, absolutely not. There is no, God is very clear. We are all judged completely equally. As to, the only advantage of being a convert is like, it's a bit like, so if you've done Hajj, you know, your sins inshallah are wiped out from before and you have a lovely clean slate, and off you start from the moment you take your shahada. But apart from that little sort of side benefit, then we are as imperfect as we are converts, you know, as perfect, imperfect as the next person. The only difference is perhaps people who embrace Islam have maybe done it more consciously, and not everyone is Muslim from a conscious point of view. But as long as you're consciously Muslim, all I do is I just sort of, I suppose, try to disabuse people of that, not of that feeling that there's any difference in sort of status, because there just isn't. In terms of the white privilege, though, I do think that I mean, it's color is such a big issue right now in our society, and yet we can't change that. I do find it odd when as someone who wears hijab, it's almost like you sort of lose a bit of that, because suddenly you're not, I don't know, people sort of see the scarf first before color of skin, depending on what environment you're in. It's all very odd, the overwhelmingness that the hijab has for some people. In terms of being a minority within the Muslim community, yes, we're seen sometimes as new Muslims for a long time, and we sometimes get the sort of, oh, sister, let me explain to you. Well, actually, maybe I'm like really so much older than you, and maybe I know a lot of things. Maybe I've just chosen not to do the certain things that you think I should be doing when I come into a mosque or whatever. So I have experienced people trying to guide me when I don't actually want to receive that particular guidance. But yeah, it takes all sorts. I was in my local mosque, which was working mosque, and I was running an open day with some friends, and a English non-Muslim lady asked me, rather an odd question actually. She asked me if I was a spy. To be honest, if I was a spy, I probably wouldn't have said yes, but I wasn't sure who she thought I was spying for, which side or whatever. But yeah, I suppose it comes back to that issue of trust. Do they anyway, for the record, I'm not, but yeah, it's a bit of a rambling response, but I suppose it just says it takes a while, I think, to be accepted within a community. And so just many years of just showing up and showing up and showing up, and then and that to me is a good way to get acceptance.
Final question from me then is about your journey after Cambridge. So you moved to South Africa, which is a long way from Cambridge. So what was the Muslim community like there? And also maybe how did race play a role in those dynamics? How was your conversion received?
So I graduated in '93, moved to South Africa about 15 or so years later, which is when I wrote the book. And it was just, I actually was very ignorant, as I have confessed. I've been ignorant about many things, and so I didn't know about the Muslim community in South Africa, and it's really different there. It's only about 2% of the population in the country, but it's a very different population. It's an educated community, wealthy community, and owns major businesses, media, and so on, and so has a level of sort of influence, you could say, and almost like status in the country that almost punching above its weight. And that's certainly the impression I had. And on the very first day we got there, and I always like to read the newspaper of the country I'm in, of the country I'm from, and the very first day I got there, there was a lady in hijab on the front page, and I thought, oh no, here we go again. And actually turned out she was an HIV/AIDS expert, and the article was all about HIV and AIDS. And that was just almost so mind-blowing for me that there could be an article about featuring a Muslim woman that wasn't about a Muslim, and particularly wasn't about something negative. This, bear in mind, this happened very soon after the events in London and the bombings of 2006 to 7 or 5, I don't remember exactly when they were, but the atmosphere at that time in the UK was very negative generally towards Muslims, and so it felt like being on holiday, to be honest, as a Muslim in South Africa, in that sense. But then there was a whole experience of race which just dominated everything, and so there I was seen first and foremost as an English person. And then when I worked at Islamic Relief, and they'd never had a white person work at Islamic Relief, and that for them was like was quite a big deal for them, and which I didn't realize. Like, I sort of tend to stumble into these things without understanding fully the whole culture and the past and people's different backgrounds that they may be coming from, and perceptions that they may have of me, simply because I tick a number of boxes, whereas I just would more take people on face value. So yeah, there was a definite history there that affected all of our interactions. But it from a religion point of view, it was very straightforward. And in those days, 10 or so years ago, even the most sort of high-end supermarkets would be putting out signs outside their shop front saying Happy Eid, Happy Ramadan. There would be the Ramadan aisles wasn't just full of sort of 10 kilos of dates or 15 liters of orange juice or whatever we get here. It's it would be sort of different products that they would offer you in Ramadan. So it just felt like I don't know, it felt very welcoming of different faiths. But that's and in fact the history of South Africa has Muslims and Hindus lived very closely together. And so there is definitely, and Christians as well, to some extent, depending on what race they were. So people got thrown together by races, and that still, but sort of elements of that was still carrying on. I think if I had married, if I had come over with my husband, or if it was in apartheid time, I think I would have ended up called coloured by the person that because of the person I married. So anyway, it's all quite confusing in terms of the race dynamics in South Africa.
Thank you very much. Unless anybody has a final question and would like to unmute themselves now, I'll just give a minute for anybody to do that. But otherwise, thank you very much for your time. We have overrun just by a few minutes, but Muslim timing, as we discussed earlier. Anybody? Then, In Sha Allah, yes, Jazakallah khair, Lucy, for giving up your time to speak to us today. It's been really fascinating. And I don't want to use the cliche and say I'm sure we've come away inspired, but we really do appreciate you speaking to us. And I also want to make it clear that this is not by any means sponsored by Newnham College. This is not an ad, although I will plug the final event of EIW, In Sha Allah, which will be held on Sunday at Lucy's College, Newnham, Iris Cafe. Please be there. Sunday 13th would be fantastic to see you all. But thank you very much for attending. And I hope that everyone's come away with a lesson that they've learned, or a practical way to support converts. Amar has put the link to the Cambridge Crescent website in the chat if you'd like to explore that further. Without any further ado, thank you. Assalamu alaikum, everybody.
Thank you so much.